All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar that we're calling A Guide to Remote Working for Montana Businesses. So I see that there's a lot of different types of businesses on this call today. I'm really grateful to hear that. I think that the information that we're providing is useful to small businesses, large businesses, and current clients. So for all of you, I appreciate your time that you're taking to join us today. I hope that you all walk away with some actionable steps that you can take. Maybe it's with First Call itself, or perhaps it's with your current IT provider, and just get some next action steps in place. I do want to, before we get started, give a big shout out to all the brave men and women that are out there in the front lines fighting this pandemic that we're going through. I know that there's a couple of you on the call, and I just want to say thank you. I think I can speak for our entire community that we really appreciate what you're doing, and know that that's a scary place to be. So thanks for taking some time to join us today. All right, so just with a little housekeeping here, my name's Meg Ross. I am a business development executive at First Call Computer Solutions. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization itself, we are a full resource technology company. We specialize in IT services, advanced security services, voice over IP phone systems. We can help with network design and implementation, and we can also help small businesses throughout the state with websites as well. First Call has been in the IT world for over 23 years, and we have a staff of over 40 IT professionals. So my role at First Call is building relationships across the state with the professionals who might need our services, right? Basically sales. I like to think that my past experience as a business owner helps me to bridge the gap between other business owners and IT, and what IT looks like to them without getting lost in the acronyms and the jargon that can often be a little overwhelming for business owners where it's not their primary line of business, right? And like most of you, my job has been affected by the pandemic, right? Although I do typically work remotely 90% of the time, most of that time when I'm working remotely is face-to-face with people, right? I'm at trade shows, I'm having face-to-face meetings, and I do really miss those interactions. So, the reality is what it is, and because of pandemic, I had to pivot, right? It's an important thing to do, and I know that all of you are doing that as well, and that's part of the reason why you're joining us today. So. The goal of these webinars, and this is the second of a series, is ultimately to educate Montana business owners about technology in a way that gives you actionable steps to take. Now, I mentioned that I'm a business development executive. That also means that I'm not a technical expert. So when bringing you information, I need to lean on people that are leaders in my organization, as well as vendors that we work with on a regular basis, people that know more than I do. So today I have Jessica Sternberg with me. She is a virtual chief information officer at First Call Computer Solutions. I'm sure that she is actually an account manager for many of you on the call today. I just wanted to have you introduce yourself for a second, Jess, and maybe say just something that the pandemic is currently affected how you work on a regular basis.
Okay, thanks, Meg. Hi, everybody. As Meg mentioned, I'm a VCIO here at First Call, and my role is to work with Montana businesses to weave technology through the business where it makes sense. I've spent my entire career standing in the gap between business people and technology with training, advising, and translating for many, many years. So in this current crisis, where I'm trying to make sure that my clients are able to keep their businesses together while they're working apart, and deal with the social restrictions. So there's a lot of talk about remote working. So this is a really timely piece for us. I've been a remote worker off and on for the better part of 20 years. So it is not a foreign concept to me, but every time you launch into it, it comes with some nuance, and we hope to cover that today.
Great. Thank you so much again for taking the time to participate in this conversation, Jess. I really appreciate it. Before we move on, I just really also want to give a shout out to Katie Buckley. She is our marketing guru or marketing director at First Call, and she's also on the call today with us. She's going to be monitoring the Q&A throughout the call, making sure that any questions that you guys have are answered in the Q&A section of the presentation. So thanks, Katie, for being here. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to put this series together. Really grateful for your time as well. So let's just talk a little bit about our agenda today. At First Call, over the last couple of weeks, and really the last month at this point, we have transitioned most of our clients to remote working, or remote computing is another way of saying that. Not all of them, because some of them are essential businesses, but we wanted to really talk about that transition and our way of defining how to do that. This is a unique time. We're dealing with fears around COVID-19. Some of those fears are rational, some of them are irrational, but at the end of the day, what our goal is as a community, as a state, is we want to get back to performing as a business, right? So right now we're in phase 1, which is the storm. We want to get into phase 2, which is the normal. And then could we, and this is my challenge to everyone on the call, could we get back to performing on an even better level than we were before all of this happened? So we're going to start with a little definition of what remote working ultimately is. And then, as you'll see, there's the word identify quite a bit in this agenda. And the reason for that is that if you have to know where you're going before you can figure out what tools will get you there. So identifying what remote working looks like to you and your business is going to be different for every organization. Identifying what technology you currently have and what you need is going to be another layer of the onion, right? And then identifying what type of engagement you need to have, with who, when, how often, all of those things. And Jess is going to really dive into that a lot deeper. So identifying security gaps is a really important thing as well, especially when talking about working remotely, because there's specific things to remote working that make you a little bit more vulnerable. It's not a bad thing as long as you understand what they are and we can work around them. Then we're going to have a couple different scenarios of solution stacks. We want you to have some information to take away here that you can actually do something with, right? I am going to talk a little bit about some just productivity tips for remote working as well. And at the end of the day, what we want you to do is have an action plan. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. To begin with, Jess, what is remote working? Can you define that for the group?
Sure. Well, first of all, remote working is in fact working. You need to do what you do from wherever you are. So with our current climate of social distancing, you need to just keep working. And we want you to be able to do that. So what we'd like to focus on today in general terms is office work with a desk that is happening not in your office, not in a traditional workspace. There's a lot of overlap with the tool sets that you might use for other types of remote working, like deskless working or mobile working, or other terms that you might hear used. But for this presentation, we're going to be focusing on that which you do in the office happening not in the office.
I love that. I mean, I think that's really impactful, actually, Jessica, and that's why I put the X through remote working, because you're right. Ultimately, what the goal is for all businesses right now is just to continue to work at all. And do you really work that much differently from home than you do when in the office? I would argue that you don't really do that. I mean, there might be aspects of home working that are more challenging, but the work still has to be accomplished, right?
The underpinnings of how you get to your work may be a little
Yeah.
bit differently, but what you do shouldn't change.
Right. Totally agreed. Awesome. All right. Well, let's kind of talk about what somebody needs to do in order to identify their remote working situation. What are some of the
Sure.
pieces there?
So when you start looking at what remote work is, you need to look at what remote working is going to look like for your organization. And this is going to be subjective with any organization. There may be roles that lend themselves to working remotely and roles that are not, that become essential to be in the office. But it, at a very basic level, you need to peel back the layers of what it's going to look like for your organization and ask yourself questions like, what does your team need to be able to do remotely? What applications or digital assets do you need to have access to? Where are they stored? This doesn't have to be a time consuming task, but I do recommend that you spend some cycles thinking about what remote work looks like and what work needs to be done to make sure that you put in a solution and you've got your eyes wide open. Think of scenarios where remote work would occur and take an inventory of the applications or files, digital or intangible, that are needed to complete the work. Um, is the work singular, so that one person could do it all by themselves? Or is the work collaborative and they need to interact? And who do they need to interact with? I had a
Right.
client recently who wanted to move a specific work role home. They wanted to get those people out of the office, keep them safe from any people that might be coming into the office and potentially carrying um, the disease. But they wanted to move their billing office home. And when we really sat down to map everything out and look at what was involved with just that one work function, it was clear that there was more to it than just getting to an application. Um, Billers need to print and scan. Um,
Right.
they need to collaborate with other members of the team to assure that what they're billing is correct. They need access to a clearinghouse where the billing goes. So there were a lot more moving parts to just, I need to get to the server, right? So while working remotely isn't a new concept, and connectivity and technology are all over the place that will allow you to work that way, you have to take a little bit of time and spend the cycles to understand the work that's going to be done in order to put together a successful plan and know when you have succeeded.
Sure. And it sounds to me like the scenario that you're talking about with this one client is, they ultimately said there's just one role, just one person that we want to have work remotely, and
For their
I'm sure
business,
that
that's what made sense.
right, and it's going to change again for everybody. There's a lot of essential businesses that are sending some people home, but still wanting them to work. And then there's other businesses that are closing down temporarily altogether for a hiatus in a sense. At least that's what we hope, right? We want them to come back, but yeah, I think that it can't be a strong enough statement to say that every business is unique. So analyzing what you really need to function right now is going to be super important.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for that. So let's go on to the next slide, which is identifying technology. So I'm looking at this as layers of an onion, right? You're ultimately trying to say, okay, this is what I have, and this is where this is what I still need access to. Does that sound right?
Exactly. So far we've looked at, okay, here's what I need to do. And now we're going to start looking at, here's what I have. You're going to continue to peel that layer back. You've drawn a mental picture of what you want as far as remote working. And now you need to start to look at how you're going to get it done and take inventory of what you've got. So it's a good idea to kind of evaluate or audit your hardware in terms of laptops and desktops and monitors and firewalls and things like that. All endpoints need a certain level of IT to make them able to work remotely correctly in a remote working environment. You can't simply just switch on remote access and assume that everything's going to work fine. This requires a new or different setup in many cases, even if you have, if you have a few people working remotely, you may still need to do something. If we go back to that scenario where my client moved their billing department to work remotely, they had to repurpose hardware. So in this particular organization, layoffs occurred, and they took the hardware that those individuals were using and repurposed those to the billing team so that they could easily take hardware home. Because that their role previously was working on a desktop, and that is not easily portable. Okay.
Right.
So you're going to make some assessments or some analyze that a little bit. There are a lot of moving parts with regard to your hardware. You're also going to evaluate your software in terms of applications, remote licensing, remote configuration. You're going to identify those mission critical business applications that are not remote enabled. And it's very possible that you have those in your organization. Many of the core business applications like payroll and time tracking and accounting are very often not set up for remote access or a remote workflow. So if you've got a process whereby people turn in time, you need to evaluate what that process looks like with social distancing. And this might require a new or different setup in many cases. So don't assume that a cloud application is remote ready either.
Sure.
Cloud applications will also have to be adjusted for extreme remote access to be able to handle more remote access load. When you're looking at software that your team needs, you need to know if it's hosted or if it's on the server or whether it lives in the cloud. Are there regulations that dictate how you access that information? Is that a limiting factor in your remote work plan? In another remote working scenario, we worked with a client that leveraged a dictation tool, and that tool worked flawlessly in the office. It was installed on the professional's workstation. It allowed for speech to text in their primary application, and had the benefit of a nice, industry specific dictionary. It was fantastic. However, when they work remotely, that's just not available. The technology just doesn't work that way. So you need to be aware of any limitations that you might encounter too, because you don't want to be surprised with that.
Sure.
You also need to look at your services in terms of bandwidth and security. And we aren't just referring to your organizational services at this point. When you're contemplating remote work, you'll necessarily have to rely on assets in your team's home, maybe even personal assets. So are you planning to leverage personal computers or mobile phones? What kind of malware exists on these devices? Are they being protected from viruses? So you're starting to peel back and look at what you've got to work with. And you need to plan to shore up those gaps. When you're looking at services, know that you're connecting your business network to your team's home network. So you need to plan to manage security on those machines potentially. You need to prepare for the massive increase in the remote workload. Many companies' networks are set up for a very limited remote access, and you could get overwhelmed with the new workload. So if your current system is set up to include only a few workers on nights or weekends, you'll need to assess that capability. And it's possible you'll need to add resource to that function of your network. Your
Okay.
phone system needs to be evaluated. It might be antiquated and unable to forward or route calls, and much less provide a soft phone capability. On-premise, non-cloud, and non-voice over IP systems often don't allow for remote connectivity. So you want to, evaluate the capability of your phone system and the level of flexibility that you're going to have with that. And finally, think about security, and then think about security again. Even outside the current crisis, this should be top of mind, and it's only compounded by our health crisis. Your security mindset needs to be an if not but when mode. Implementing advanced remote cybersecurity protection could involve changing to a remote model. And when you do that, you open yourself up to much more cybersecurity risk, and you need to be aware of that. Be aware that malware could already exist on some of the hardware that you're going to use, and you need to make sure that you are effectively protecting yourself from those risks.
So from a technology perspective, a couple of notes here. Just one is as a current client, for those of the folks that are on this call today that are current clients, when Jess is talking about basically taking an audit, we do that, right, at the very beginning of our relationship with any of our clients. So we do know what you currently have, and that's part of what makes it possible for us to help you become remote. But for those people that don't have a current IT partner, or maybe they have somebody that they call as a reactive support mechanism, we did create a little handout that's going to be sent with the recording of this webinar for you to do kind of an internal audit for yourself, right? It doesn't, as Jess mentioned, it doesn't need to take a tremendous amount of time, but it is super important for you to understand what you have, where it lives, and how it needs to function. And then obviously, if you're unaware of what changes need to be made, finding the right resource to help implement those. Does that sound about right, Jess?
That sounds exactly right.
Awesome. So that's one layer to peel back. Again, we're talking about identifying. If you don't know what you have, you can't get to where you need to go. It's all about the plan. So the next piece that we're going to be talking about is engagement. Talk to us a little bit about how important this piece is when really peeling back these layers.
Absolutely. So your business doesn't occur in a vacuum. There are other people involved. You have clients, you have vendors, you have a team. So it's really important to peel back that layer of engagement. And when you're scoping out what remote working looks like, spend some time specifically thinking about engagement. The who, what, where, and how remote workers will engage with internal resources, external resources, whether they're vendors or clients. Is it face-to-face contact that you need? Is it needed, or is it desired and it's a nice to have? You need to know the answer to those questions. Do you need to be able to share screens or presentations? Do you need to be able to record a video to reference at a later time or share? How are you going to get the word out to your community about how to engage with you? So this thought process will naturally dovetail into a conversation of how you'll accomplish things. Recently, Zoom has been hailed as a simple solution to get face-to-face engagement. I have clients that are using it successfully, but it's not without issues. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. So this is why you need to take a look at it. So while it has merits, it might not be the end-all be-all for everybody. This client that is leveraging Zoom is it's for a telehealth application, and they plan to do some Zoom meeting recordings so that they could educate their community on what that experience was going to look and feel like. And what that practitioner learned is that while Zoom is great for meetings, it's probably not the best at recording an educational video,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So during the process, he's like, "Oh, Zoom is really cool and neat. So let's do that." He called me up and he said, "So I recorded this recording and I can't get to it now."
Yeah.
So, and after a quick conversation of what he was trying to do, I recommended to him that maybe he use a PowerPoint, which allows you to do some recording and some screen sharing and recording to produce that educational video so that you can really pop from one environment to the other during the course of the presentation and package that up in a way that it's distributable.
Right.
So looking at that engagement and what you're going to need to get out of that engagement is really important. So you're going to ask yourself lots of questions. How and when are you going to engage with clients? How and when are you going to engage with each other? Because again, your business doesn't happen in a vacuum. Um,
Right.
what are you going to need to share? How are you going to conduct meetings? All of those things are going to become relevant.
Well, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about tool options in the solution slides, but I just want to address one thing. You brought up Zoom, and there's been a lot of chatter about the
Mhm.
security of that platform. And I've had some internal conversations with our team as well about this. And again, I think that you make a good point that Zoom does work for people, right?
Sure.
There are some security risks around that, but they can be overcome with understanding that there are different levels in that
Mhm.
platform in which you can engage. So there's a free version, and then there's a paid for version, and additionally, not maintaining the same Zoom access for every meeting. And
Correct.
then you have the ability to change your password on Zoom as well in terms of the meeting invite. Those are all just
Mhm.
little things that you can do to make that a little bit more secure. Would you agree?
I would. Zoom, actually, for this particular client, Zoom has a HIPAA compliant version that you pay a premium for, but at that point, they are assuming the HIPAA compliance liability.
Right,
Um, but there are certainly things you can do inside the Zoom environment to make that environment more secure. But they are, as an organization, they are certainly dealing with their ration of issues with
sure.
the uptick in participation.
So what it comes right down to in terms of engagement is that you have to understand who you have to talk to, why you have to talk to them, how often. And with that information, you can start to evaluate the tools that will work to get that communication done.
Right.
And so we talked about Zoom a little bit. There are things like Teams. We talked about PowerPoint. There's a lot of different options there. And again, we can get into some more solution stuff, but I do agree that engagement is a really important piece to peel back. So I appreciate that information there, Jess. So let's move on to the next one. All right. So identifying security risks. I'll jump in here a little bit. I think that I'm going to ask your input as well, Jess. Ultimately, and for anyone that's been on my first webinar, which was around really cybersecurity in general, I just made sure to put this slide in again because you can't talk about security enough, right? There are new challenges with working remotely when it comes to security. But let's just talk about security as a layered approach for your business, whether you're working remotely or in the office, whether you are a 2-person team or a 250-person team. There are some basic blocking and tackling pieces that have to be in place to keep you secure. So, and all of these things are part of agreements that we have with our current clients in terms of the first 6. So you want to have a firewall, right? It may need to have VPN access. That's going to be based on how you need to work. But having a firewall is going to be really important. It's basically protecting you from everything outside of your environment. Understanding that having spam and antivirus software installed on any of your devices, and when we talk about devices, it's your desktops and it's your laptops ultimately, and your servers. So you need to have those installed, but I can't stress this enough. They have to stay up to date as well. So that brings us to the next one, which is patch management. That's basically updating your software. Software needs to be updated, tools need to be updated, browsers need to be updated. As vendors ultimately find vulnerabilities, they start to roll out new software updates to help bridge those gaps and fill those gaps, right? If you're not patching them, then you're open to the vulnerabilities that bad actors are basically trying to take advantage of. Another thing that's super easy to implement, and if you do nothing else after this call, if you're a small business that doesn't have a major plan in place for how to move forward, absolutely look into every one of your applications and everything that you're utilizing and see if you can create a multi-factor authentication for login. Basically, that's you can put your password in, but you still have one other step to take before you get logged into something. Having password management software and training around password management is a really important factor as well, especially if you have multiple people within your organization, helping them understand what's your password plan. This is our policy. This is how often you need to change it. And then utilizing software to help you manage that if needed. Definitely don't be, creating a Google document and just listing all of your passwords in it. And then the next, for just the basic blocking and tackling, is making sure that you have good backups. And we are going to get into a data piece on our next slide, but I can't stress this enough either. Your information is really important. What would happen if you lost it tomorrow? So in addition to having a pandemic going on and business not probably being where you want it to be, if you also lost your data, it would just be devastating. So understand that you need to have encrypted backup. You need to create a disaster recovery plan with yourself. Now, those are things that IT companies can help you with. Your Joe down the street can help you with. That helps you do IT stuff, but they just need to be done, right? So the other things on this slide are around something that I would consider more advanced security. When we talk about dark web monitoring, security incident and event management, security awareness training, DNS protection, phish testing, and advanced endpoint protection. Not every small business needs that extra layer, right? Again, we're just thinking we got the basic blocking and tackling. It's a lot is based on behavior of individuals to keep you safe. But then if you have something that where you have a lot more compliance or regulations that you have to live up to, you're going to want to start to look at options for advanced security services. For those people that don't know, Jess, could you just talk a little bit about advanced endpoint protection and DNS protection? I think that those two are a little difficult for the layman to understand.
Sure. So if we think about all of these layers of security, I like to throw it into a football analogy. So the first 6 you talked about, this is your defensive line, okay? They are there to protect, and it is there so that you have some recourse if, God forbid, something should happen, okay? The advanced security is going to be more your offensive line and your special teams. So if you are in an industry where you have some compliance concerns where you have a policy in your organization that says thou shalt not have any protected health information on your workstation, okay? The requirement for compliance is that you have a policy and that you can enforce it. And without that advanced endpoint protection, you can't enforce it. You need to have something out there on your network that's going to monitor and detect any of that protected information that happens to be sitting out on someone's workstation so that you can go clean it up. You can't fix what you don't know about. So this is a more proactive approach in your cybersecurity stance. All of these bits put together.
And in terms of phish testing, I just touching on that for a second. Again, our goal here is for people to understand that there are things that you can put in place today. Maybe you need an IT partner to do that, but some of it you can do on your own, right? So phish testing is a good one to kind of pull out here. if you have concerns about behavioral things that are happening within your organization, especially while working remotely, there are things that you can implement where you're sending possible spam basically to your other employees and seeing who catches that and designates it as spam. That's ultimately what phish testing is. And I do want to say, in terms of our current situation and COVID-19, there are a lot of bad actors out there that are taking advantage of crisis. Okay, so if you think about how people behave, there's the rational and there's the irrational behavior. And there's a lot of people that are just like, oh, there's another email about an update around COVID-19. Let me click on it. I want to read more. I want more information about it. I want to know when I'm going to be able to leave my house again. All of those things. Well, people are taking advantage of that fear that your people have and implementing malware and spyware and ransomware through those emails. So it's really important to know that that's a real risk and it's happening right now. Would you agree, Jess?
I would. Behavior is hands down your largest risk. All of the technical things that you're putting into place to protect your information is largely to protect you from behaviors. So
Right.
taking a proactive approach, that you're not just educating your users on what you're needing, on how you need them to be vigilant, but you're also testing them and you're educating them on a regular basis so that that vigilance remains top of mind.
Agreed, entirely. And in terms of our handouts as well, I want everyone to know that this slide itself, we've created into a little bit of a checklist. So that's another thing that you can print off, have a conversation with your current IT provider about it, or just do it for yourself and kind of figure out what you need to implement going forward. And I want to recognize as well that, you know, this is a good time to start planning, even if you can't pull the trigger and implement everything. Take the time to just do a little bit at a time. You don't have to do everything all at once. And I did add on the bottom of the slide, just have a trusted IT partner, somebody that is willing to engage with you on a regular basis, help you with planning, help you with so then the trusted team and client engagement piece is just an added benefit, right, from the security perspective. Okay. So in terms of data and file sharing, let's have you talk a little bit about that, Jess.
Okay. So with our focus, we're talking about, you know, things that were traditionally in an office that are now happening not in the office. So when you're working in a traditional office setting, you're protected by your firewall. That is that thing that protects you from the outside world and helps keep your data safe. It draws a virtual box around your network to help secure you. Systems are in place to scan for risks as files, email, internet traffic all pass through the firewall, and access to everything is relatively unfettered and easy. Okay. Now, when you introduce a remote working scenario, your security risks go up significantly. So when you're considering remote working solutions, remember that generally when usability is high or it's easy, security is low.
Right.
Some solutions like Log Me In, there's a free version of Log Me In, and it's super easy to use, not especially secure. So when security when usability is low, meaning there's a lot of hoops for you to jump through, then your security is higher. So the important thing here is to find a balance of usability and security that works for your organization, for your level of regulation, and that is appropriate for the types of data that you're going to be working with inside your engagement. okay?
Right.
Because when you are working remotely, you are quite literally punching a hole through that firewall. And the security measures that you have in place will dictate how big that hole is and how leaky that hole is, and how visible your communication to your network is to the outside world.
Right.
In addition to that, if you don't have a cloud backup, I would encourage you to revisit your cloud backups or your backup solution or scheme. Most organizations have a backup solution that is on their network, but as cyber risk is increased, it's important to have redundancy in the cloud for your backups in the event of corruption or ransom of your network assets. Okay.
Right.
You also want to look at your password policy. You want to make sure that it is complex enough that it can withstand a hacking event. And what I mean by that is, do you have the hieroglyphics? Is it letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, all of those things? And length matters as well. How many tries you get before you get locked out. I know from my perspective, I would much rather reset someone's password every other week if I have to, as long as it's complex enough that it can withstand a hacking event. Is your password the same for everything? So if your password becomes available on the dark web and somebody gets it, have you given them the keys to the kingdom? So if you're using the same password across the board because it's much easier for you to remember, and we all do this, know that with this increased risk, you're assuming more risk by having a common password across everything. So the other thing is, how do you know if your credentials are compromised? And that's all part of that advanced security offering is, again, being proactive, going on the offensive. Information is power, and you need that information in order to effectively secure yourself and your business.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the best analogies I've heard around data and security and file sharing in general was from a colleague that works at First Call who said, you know, imagine that you live in a house and your house has no doors and
That's
you are
secure.
super secure. You're inside, no one's getting in, you're not getting out, you're really, really safe. But you have to go to the grocery store, right? So you got to build a door to get out. And once you do that, you open up that security risk. That's why you put a lock on your door. So if that helps to visualize the importance of understanding where your data is and how you're accessing it, super, super important. I really love this slide. I think it's really impactful, Jess. I do know that we're running a little behind, so let's go through some of these solutions as well, from a perspective of here's some options for you, right? Keeping in mind collectively that if you're not getting the information that you're hoping for today, please reach out to us. If you're a client, reach out to your account manager. If you're not, reach out to me. My information will be associated with this. I can help walk you through some additional recommendations. But one of the scenarios here just is, you know, somebody that just needs access to their assets and their data, just like we were talking about, right? Maybe that's a law firm. You know, everything's stored in their office. It's on a server. What kind of tools do they need to have in place to be able to effectively do that? I'm just the top ones here.
So, you know, off the cuff, I would say definitely your firewall and making sure that your server where everything lives, that you can securely access it. So you're talking, you know, possibly a virtual private network, possibly some remote desktoping. Beyond that, I would say, you know, I would look at the Office 365 stack. Most businesses own Office 365, and it's stuff you already own, so it would make sense to make use of it if you can in your environment, and most environments can make use of it. Any solution, I'm going to recommend that you have some training with PowerPoint, and also evaluate your phone system because you're going to need to continue to contact your clients.
So and just really quickly around Office 365 and the Teams piece, you know, there are some soft phone options utilizing Teams as well, correct? So if somebody is really interested in making some shifts, but they don't want to invest in a whole big phone system, there are options outside of that, correct?
Absolutely. There are soft phone options and conference calling options available with
Okay,
Teams.
awesome. Let's look at another scenario here. And this one I thought was impactful because there's just a lot of governments right now that they still need to be functioning, and they need to hold these public meetings. What are some tools that they can be utilizing if they're not currently doing that, to still allow the public to virtually attend?
You know, the Zoom that we talked about is an obvious one. And the Office 365, Teams is a meeting space, if you will. It is a communication hub, and you can camp onto that the ability to have conferences and meetings, and the limit on those meetings is about 2,500 participants. So it should easily accommodate, you know, a meeting of, you know, a municipal meeting, if you will, that is open to the public. Microsoft has also recently made Teams available for free to anybody that wants it. And they've actually kind of shrunk that install so it's a lot easier to use.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So you mean there are free tools out, like Teams is a free tool right now, that can be utilized, that's also compliant for regulatory perspectives as well, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one more scenario here. So this is just a general virtual consultant. So basically this is everybody right now. You know, touch on the things that are most important to understand that are different from the other scenarios.
So in this scenario, you're looking at dealing one-on-one with your public. So again, I would recommend Teams. We're looking at SharePoint as a place to store files. When files are stored in SharePoint, which is part of the Office 365 stack, it kind of removes that need to have a firewall to get to files stored on your server. They move to the cloud at that point.
Gotcha.
You may still need a firewall to get to line of business applications, but the Office 365 stack is going to give you that ability to provide direction to your team, to help your team feel together even though they're being distanced. So you just need to look at the scenarios that you have where you need to interact. This is very engagement heavy. So you
Sure.
look at how you need to engage, and you know, train your staff using PowerPoint, because obviously you can't get them all in a room and train them. Your phone system's going to be important. You're going to look at what computers you're using. If you're using your staff's personal computers, I'm going to recommend that you would look at a commercial grade antivirus and
So,
look at
so an example of a
managing
good
those.
antivirus from that perspective would be like WebRoot, which is something
Mm-hmm.
that we advocate quite a bit. So for those
Yes.
people that need to understand that. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question for you, Jess. How important are webcams and headsets ultimately when we're talking about remote working? So, you know, is it important to focus on those? Will it be in the long term?
So you'll notice that I have a headset on. I prefer to use a headset when I'm working from my home. Invariably, there's going to be some background noise that I don't really want to share with my clients. So I
Mhm.
like having the noise canceling headset. Depending upon the hardware that you have, you may not have, if you've moved a desktop home, you may not have sound
Right.
and the ability to speak to it. Now, the computer would support it, but you need to add a webcam and a microphone. So in terms of the engagement level and the types of engagement you require to get your work done, you may opt to add a webcam and a headset.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, so we got some basic understanding of solution stacks. Again, you know, can't say this enough, but every solution stack is going to be different. It's going to be based on those first couple of slides, which is you identifying what you ultimately need. And once you get to that point, which is how we work at First Call, that's the only time that you can start getting and implementing the right recommendations for how to move forward. So I really appreciate all that information, Jess. Again, we still have a little bit of time at the end for some questions. I'm going to move through a couple of slides here, and so that we can start answering a few. The next slide at this point is just, you know, my way of saying, hey, I work from home all the time, and I've talked to a lot of other people that have a remote working lifestyle, and just ask for some basic tips on how to be productive while working at home. One is, and I think that a lot of people hear this, keep your routine as if you were going into the office. Make sure you have a dedicated workspace. I know that that's not realistic for everybody, especially if you have kids and family around, but do your best to have that dedicated workspace, and create boundaries with your household members so that they understand that when mom or dad is working, you know, this is when you cannot disrupt me. Set some goals for yourself and some accountability. It's harder for you know, everybody to do that as a team when you're all apart. So take that upon yourself. And then, you know, work in 90-minute blocks. That's basically the attention span that somebody has. It's 90 minutes at a time. So give yourself that break every 90 minutes to get up, to do something else. And then lastly, both stay connected and over communicate, I think, are really important to discuss here. When people are used to working from the office and they start working remotely, people can get complacent. They can struggle with feeling like they're not part of a team anymore. So as a business owner or a leader, you need to make sure that you're staying connected with your team. You also need to make sure that you're over communicating on some levels as well. So the next thing is, obviously, we've talked about all of these identifying pieces and how to create kind of an action plan for what makes sense. But I really want to make sure that everyone understands that this is going to pass, right? Is your technology stack ready for when it passes? In every crisis, there is opportunity. So figure out what that opportunity is to you. Can you be utilizing technology in a different way, in a better way going forward once you return back to that office space? Maybe some of you have decided, well, I could save money and not have everyone come back into this one office. What does that look like from a technology perspective? I think that it's just really important that you're making sure your operating systems are up to date. You check on your phone systems if they need to be updated. You don't have to pull triggers on implementing things right now. It's just not the right thing to do. But it is the right time to make the plan. There's a lot of changes that are going to come out of this from a technology perspective, and you need to be prepared to stay in the top of that. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Jess, before I move on?
I think that was very well stated.
Okay. So just kind of a quick recap, and then we're going to get some questions here. You know, ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish is helping you go from phase 1, which is a storm, to phase 3, which is performing effectively, seeking out better ways to get there. And we've broken down the definition of what remote working is and what it means to you, how to identify and audit your technology and your tool stacks, to who you have to engage with, identifying security gaps, and then we've offered a few solutions today. Not every solution stack is going to work for every business. Just can't say that enough. Make sure that you're engaging somebody that's a professional that can help you put the right stack of tools together for you and your business. Again, IT needs to work for your business. You don't need to be working for IT. And you're right, and the right partner will help you with that. So that's basically the end. I'd like to just open it up for some questions if there's anything that has popped up. Katie, would you mind chiming in here?
Yeah, most definitely. So the first question that came in was, can you expand a little bit further on what soft phones are and what that, can you define what that actually is?
You want to tackle that, Jess?
Sure. A soft phone is going to be, obviously you have a phone system in your organization and people dial into that number. A soft phone is going to be that phone functionality that lives on either your computer so that you can use a headset and a microphone like I'm doing now to communicate via phone, or on your mobile device.
So in terms of accessibility to soft phones, Jess, I mean, is it just simply a setting in some cases? It's just, the tool that you're using. Is it is an easy thing to implement, I guess, is my question.
So it's going to be a function of your phone system. Generally speaking, that's going to be a function of a voice over IP phone system. So if you have, a traditional phone system, it may not even be an option. But in a voice over IP system, it is going to be done through licensing on that server, and then, assigning those licenses out.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. What's next, Katie?
Wonderful. The next one was, you mentioned Skype for Business to Teams. Question is, they thought that Skype for Business was being phased out. Is that a reality, or is that something that's still active?
It is something that's happening in phases.
Yeah.
So there is still such an animal as Skype for Business, but that functionality is being merged into Teams. Teams is the new Skype for Business. So it's not done, but Microsoft is actively doing what they call decrementing or depreciating Skype for Business.
So from that perspective, if somebody was exploring new tools, we wouldn't necessarily encourage them to look at Skype as a solution when all that functionality started going into Teams.
Absolutely. If you're going to go through the trouble of implementing something new in your organization, something that you haven't done before, jumping in right now with Skype for Business would probably not be the way to go. I would direct you to Teams if you're going to adopt something.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, that's a segue into the next question then. This question's regarding Teams and is whether or not there is a number on the people that you can allow in a conference call in Microsoft Teams. Are there limitations to that?
So if you have a license, so you have Microsoft Teams, which is the free thing, and if you're internal to your organization, you can have video conferences in and amongst yourselves. But if you need to involve outside people like you would with a municipality, you would need to have that phone conference line, and the limitation there is 2,500 participants.
So just to clarify really quickly, so there's a free version of Teams that allows you to talk within your organization, but then if you want to have the ability to communicate on a larger scale, you would have to pay for a license around that, and that first number is 2,500.
So there's a Teams subscription.
Okay.
And Teams is implemented in Office 365 tenants. So think of that as your organization's cloud. Gotcha. And if you are communicating in and amongst your team members that are all in your cloud or your tenant, then that video capability is evident. Okay.
Gotcha.
But if you want to schedule a meeting that has a dial-in number or you want to use phone capabilities from Teams, then that would involve additional licensing.
Gotcha. Okay. Anything else on your side, Katie?
Yeah, we'll wrap it up with this question, and I believe, Jess, you'd probably be posed best to answer this one. You mentioned the importance of VPN, and this person knows that VPNs are often used to tunnel into networks securely, but do you recommend using them for general web browsing? What would be your thoughts on that?
It's a good question.
Honestly, with the cybersecurity client, I would never say no to a VPN. It's just the cyber risk climate is high. So I actually recommended to one of my clients the other day when he asked a question about his home network, and I recommended that he have a firewall and implement a firewall in his home just based on the types of internet activity that he participates in. That's not normal for a lot of people to have a firewall in their home. They have their, you know, their internet comes in, they connect it to a router, and you're on the worldwide internet.
Right.
But you'll hear a lot of talk. I know that you know, personal, what is it, LifeLock and Norton have gotten together to have private VPNs for, so when you're browsing on your phone. And again, I would never say no to a VPN.
Sure. You know, that just as we wrap this up, one other note that I'd like to make just in terms of the router position, since there's a lot of people working from homes. One is there are security settings on your routers. Okay, so often people are just plugging everything in. It's just plug and play, and you're just not thinking about it. But if you're concerned about some security, you can look into what security settings are involved with your current router. And if you're having some challenges with connectivity, or you have you're using more internet than you have in the past, keep in mind that there are routers out there that are better than others. So if you just have the router that came with the internet connection from your internet provider, it may be worth looking at something that has a little bit more bulk to it. So there are solutions out there around just personal routers too. Okay, so I think that helps us wrap it up. We've got about exactly an hour here. Really appreciate, again, everybody's time today. You know, I hope that everyone has something that they can walk away with and take actions on. Again, if you're a current IT client for First Call, please reach out to your account manager if you have additional questions around any of these things that we've talked about today. And if you're not, please reach out to me. My email's right here. You will all be receiving a recording of this webinar and the handouts that are associated with it. So with that, I will say thank you very much and have a wonderful day, everybody.